Good evening. My name is Celestina DiMauro, and I'm a member of the class of 2015, majoring in sociology and anthropology here at Lewis & Clark. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to the Lewis & Clark Center for Entrepreneurship's inaugural Fireside Chat. Our distinguished guest this evening is Mr. Allan Vermeulen. In just a moment, my classmate, Sam Kumasaka, will introduce both Mr. Vermeulen and Michael A. Kaplan, who will be asking Mr. Vermeulen questions, a number of which have been solicited from and submitted by the Lewis & Clark community. Before Sam does so, I'd like to briefly introduce Lewis & Clark Center for Entrepreneurship to those of you who may not yet be familiar with it. The Center for Entrepreneurship seeks to serve as a community hub, not only for students of Lewis & Clark's College of Arts and Sciences, the Graduate School of Education and Counseling, and the Law School, but also for alumni and friends of the college at large. I can personally speak to the work the center is doing. This past winter break, I participated in a week-long winter workshop entitled Principles and Practices of Entrepreneurship. The center organized this wonderful and inspiring opportunity for students to explore and engage with the entrepreneurial world. Among the week's agenda of activities were various guest speakers, including alumni and prominent business people, networking opportunities, and a team project in which students collaborated to pitch a business plan to a board of experienced entrepreneurs. And yes, that happened all in 1 week. However, in just that 1 week, us students really got a grasp of what the entrepreneurial world is like, and left many students, including myself, wanting more. That is the true measure of a successful program, the inspiration of students to engage in further inquiry, exploration, and collaboration. It is in this interest of furthering entrepreneurial excellence, collaboration, and connections on Lewis & Clark's campus and with the larger community that the Center for Entrepreneurship will be presenting an ongoing series of fireside chats with accomplished individuals sharing their perspectives on entrepreneurship and innovation. Please join me in welcoming Sam Kumasaka to the podium to introduce Mr. Allan Vermeulen and Mac.
Thank you, Celestina. As my classmate just mentioned, my name is Sam, and I am a member of the College of Arts and Sciences class of 2016. I am a double major in environmental studies and economics. It is my privilege and honor to introduce to you Michael A. Kaplan, who is Managing Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, and tonight's distinguished guest, Mr. Allan Vermeulen. Before making these introductions, I would like to join my classmate Celestina in sharing a few brief words about our new Center for Entrepreneurship. As I learned more about the center this winter, I was surprised by how well the entrepreneurial mindset and its emphasis on exploring and building new connections meshes with the themes that are central to the academic community at Lewis & Clark College. The Center for Entrepreneurship and the programs it has created, like the venture competition, are really excellent opportunities for students to use the diverse interests they discover in school to take action right now and gain practical experience. I really appreciate the chance to get exposed to accomplished people, like our speaker tonight, as I begin this process for myself. Asking Mr. Vermeulen questions this evening will be Michael A. Kaplan. He joined Lewis & Clark this past August, teaming with the center's academic director, Brian Detweiler-Bedell, to help lead the Center for Entrepreneurship. In addition to his full-time role at Lewis & Clark, Mac serves as managing principal of Revenue Capital Management, a Portland-based venture capital firm he co-founded that makes revenue royalty investments, and GK Ventures, which makes investments in small and early-stage companies. He has a BA in economics from Clark University and a JD from Boston College Law School. He has asked me to include that he is thrilled to now be a PIO. Mr. Allan Vermeulen, who has been with Amazon.com for 14 years, puts it very humbly when he says he has worked his way through a variety of titles that include Vice President, Platform Services, Vice President, Amazon Web Services Engineering, Chief Technical Officer, and most recently, Distinguished Engineer. Prior to Amazon, Mr. Vermeulen was VP Development and Chief Technology Officer for Rogue Wave Software. During his 7 years at Rogue Wave, it grew from a small Corvallis, Oregon startup to a publicly traded company. Outside of work, Mr. Vermeulen has stated he enjoys investing in high-potential, very early-stage companies and participates in several Portland-based angel investment funds. He holds a Bachelor of Science and a PhD in Systems Design Engineering from the University of Waterloo. Mr. Vermeulen is an author of the well-regarded book, The Elements of Java Style. In his spare time, he runs, flies airplanes, and also likes to walk across islands. Most recently, he and his wife walked from the south of England to the north of Scotland in slightly less than 3 months. This 1,200-plus mile walk is known as Le Jog, Land's End to John O'Groats. All of which makes us very pleased to have Allan Vermeulen sitting down for a bit to talk with us tonight. Please help the Lewis and Clark Center for Entrepreneurship welcome Mr. Allan Vermeulen.
Great. Well, it's great to have you with us here tonight. Thanks for coming to Lewis and Clark, Al.
Yeah, happy to be here. And everybody, just so you know, people call you Mac. Everyone at Amazon calls me Al V. So
We're there. Great. So the questions tonight will fall mainly into 3 buckets: education, technology, work, and career. And there should be cards at the end of the pews here. So if folks in the audience have questions, please feel free to write them down, and they'll get collected as the evening goes on. And Brian Detweiler-Bedell, our academic director, will get those, and we'll get to those before the evening is over. So maybe just to break the ice and to have a little bit of fun getting started, I'd like to ask you a few personal technology questions, as in, do you use Windows or Apple as an operating system?
well, I should find out. I do want to say thanks for having me here at Lewis and Clark in this fantastic facility. I walked around the campus a little bit before I came here, and it's just beautiful. You guys are lucky to be going to school in such a fabulous place. And I want to find out from the audience, how many people in the audience are like technical sort of people? Geeky sort of computer people, so like half or so. Okay, so I can answer that question in a reasonable way. So I'm a hardcore Mac user and have been ever since they changed OS 10 to be based on the next OS because it's Linux underneath. So all my Linux scripts, and I've been using Unix since probably before most of you were born. So all that amassed stuff works on my Mac, and that's why I'm a big-time Mac guy.
Great. How about, do you carry a laptop or a tablet? Or maybe haul around several servers in your backpack?
So I have a sticker on one of my laptops that says that EC2 and S3 are my computer. Those are cloud things for people who don't know what they are. And so I have a whole mess of stuff because I don't really keep any local state on any of my devices. So I've got iPads and an iPhone, and I've got a couple of laptops, one with a big screen, one with a little screen, depending on where I'm going or what I'm doing. So I carry all those things.
Big backpack. iPhone
No,
or...
a small backpack, or a backpack that's just the right size, because I pick which thing I want to bring with me.
Great. iPhone or Android?
iPhone. You know, my wife switched carriers to Verizon a few years ago when that meant you couldn't use your iPhone anymore. I had an iPhone 1, the thing was a rock. She switched carriers to Verizon, and we had to get Android devices, and I tried, I really tried, but I just couldn't figure it out. Probably the young peoples at work, they all seem to have the Android devices, and they've got it dialed in, but I just can't figure it out.
Kindle Fire or an iPad?
I have 5 Kindles, and I have 2 iPads.
Do you prefer texts or emails?
It depends what's going on. So to me, a text message is like walking up to your office and banging on the glass and saying, Al, there's something going on. And so if something is going on that's timely, that's awesome. Otherwise, I much prefer email because I can, take care of it when I'm going to go and do that.
Facebook account?
I have never succumbed to Facebook. Actually, that's not quite true. I did actually set up a Facebook account. I've got a few Facebook accounts so I can use things like Spotify, but I have no friends. I have one Facebook account that I set up when my daughter was walking the Appalachian Trail last year because she was putting pictures on Facebook. So on that one, I have one friend.
Sweet.
So I average like about a quarter of a friend.
And how about Twitter?
I don't tweet. I'm just by the nature of who I am. I tend to be more of a long-form thinker. I really go crazy, with the constant stream of stuff coming through something like Twitter.
Okay. And how about car?
Yeah, I bought a new car last year. I bought a Tesla, and it's awesome. For those, I mean, this is you guys are an entrepreneurial school. I don't know if you'll look at Tesla as a case study, but it's an awesome case study in how to design a product. Because every other car I've had, I now feel was designed by committee. And Tesla, for good or ill, is completely the vision of Elon Musk. And so, you know, you can complain about some things like the lack of rear seat cup holders, but man, that car, everything about it just flows. The design aesthetic runs all the way through the car, and it looks like a sedan, but it is amazingly fast.
So from the comment about the rear seat cup holders, does that mean you've actually sat in the rear seat of your Tesla?
I have not, I'm afraid. Although one thing I do just so you all know is I love to let people drive the car because I think electric cars are an awesome thing, and the Tesla really shows that vision. And so my son's friends, you know, I'll encourage them, hey, let's go for a drive someplace, and just so they can see what an electric car feels like. And I will let them go out to a quiet country road with me in the passenger seat and just open it up once, because you have to experience that. How many of you here have driven a Tesla? A couple of people. Is it awesome or what?
Right. Well, as you might imagine, well, those are fantastic answers. Thank you very much. I think I will start with education.
All right.
As you can probably guess, we think about that a bit here,
Yes.
So we're interested. Tell us a little bit about your education. What did you study when you were an undergrad, and maybe a little bit about if you had it to do over again, would you study the same thing?
Yeah, sure, I can. So my education's pretty straightforward and sort of dull. As a kid, I like to build things, and that's sort of what I'm into. I like to work on cars. You know, I had 3 computers in my bedroom in 1981. They had 1 in my high school. And I like to, you know, take them apart and tinker with them and all that stuff. So I went to engineering school. I studied systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo, because when I toured the school, they had a robot arm there, and I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And I wanted to do that. And I did actually end up working in that lab. And then I ended up staying at Waterloo for kind of personal reasons. I got married, and my wife hadn't finished her undergrad yet, so we were kind of stuck there, and ran through my PhD in systems design engineering. In terms of what would I do differently, that's a great question. I don't know that I would change all that much, because I'm a fairly technical guy, and I enjoyed learning the technology stuff. You know, you're running the entrepreneurship program here, or co-running it, and I had to learn a lot of that stuff kind of on my own after I got into business kind of by accident. Which worked out. I mean, you can do that, but it would have been interesting to learn more of that. The big piece of advice that I give people who are in college, and I received this advice when I started graduate school, so it would have changed what I did in undergraduate, is when you choose your courses based on the professor who is teaching them, not on the material, as much as you possibly can. Because if you take a tremendously awesome subject from a professor who's not that great, you're not going to learn anything. And if you go into a subject that offhand seems kind of dull or a little bit outside of your area of interest from an awesome prof, you will remember that your whole life. And the other part of that is it gives you a nice wide grounding for your education, which I think is super important. This idea of having to get very specialized and narrow, you know, when you're 20 years old seems totally crazy to me. Does that seem right, or am I nuts?
Well, it sounds interesting when you talk about the classes you take and not. It reminds me of Bill Gates, who is kind of famous at Harvard, I suppose, for not having graduated. And I understand that actually one of the things he's famous for while he was at Harvard is not actually attending the classes for which he had registered for, but attending quite a few classes that he had not signed up for. What might some of your friends at Waterloo have said about Allan taking classes, or what do you think a little bit about that?
Well, I didn't have to do that because I did sign up for the courses that I wanted to take. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's awesome if you have vision the way Bill Gates did to drop out of school and pursue that vision. You know, sometimes you have a vision and it's all-consuming, and you're lucky enough that things start to fall together. But I'll also say that, you know, I interview a lot of people, for engineering jobs, and I have interviewed a lot of people who came this close to finishing their undergraduate or especially their graduate degrees. That one's really common, and dropped out to pursue something like that, and it just never quite took off, and they've always regretted not spending the extra little bit of time to finish their degree. So, you know, that's a tough one, because I would say if you do have that drive of a Bill Gates, sure, take that path, but don't take it lightly.
I think I hear you saying, stay in school.
Stay in school, kids!
So you say you see a lot of people at Amazon looking for jobs. Tell us a little bit about...
No, I see a lot of people who are looking for jobs who come to Amazon.
Yes.
I don't see a lot of people at Amazon looking for jobs.
Thank you for clarifying. That is, in fact, what I was...
Sometimes I see those too, but that's not...
So when those people are coming to Amazon looking for jobs, in terms of education, what's important? Do you care about where they went to school, what their grades were, what they studied? How do you at Amazon look at education?
That's really interesting, and it's really probably interesting for all of you too. Hiring, you know, by the time you're hiring senior people, you know, where they went to school, their educational background, not so important, because they have lots of other things on their resume to distinguish them in one way or another, and you can follow along. And we do hire even very junior people who, you know, never went to college or what have you, but the problem is that when you're hiring junior people, you need some way to differentiate them, right? You have a pile of resumes this big, how are you going to decide which ones you're going to look at? And basically we look for, you know, something that helps these people stand out. So in terms of, does it matter what school you went to? Well, sure, if you have a 3.6 from Stanford, that's a different thing from a 3.6 from some state school in the Midwest. On the other hand, if you have a 4.0 from, you know, a state school in the Midwest, that also stands out. If your grades are you know, meh, but you founded a company and did a bunch of stuff, that's awesome too. But you need to have something. So the answer to your question is yes, it does matter what school you came from, and it does matter what your grades are like. But the real general answer is it matters that you have something to differentiate you from other folks.
Terrific.
Does that make sense?
A lot of sense to me. I guess I'd ask you a little bit about a stereotype that I think is fair to say is held about engineers, and that is they tend to be fairly good analytical or linear thinkers, but aren't necessarily considered to be creative.
Are you talking about me personally? Is that what I'm...
Not on camera. No, I would never. What do you? Is that a fair stereotype? You know a lot of engineers. Is that a fair stereotype?
I do know a lot of engineers. So like all stereotypes, there's some truth to that. But by and large, I'd say the engineers we hire at Amazon tend to be very creative types, and I don't know if that's because engineers are just more creative than people give them credit for, or because we select for that out of the engineering population. But we have this thing we talk about that in our view, engineers are not order takers. And I found it terrific when interviewing people, if they've had any work experience, to ask them what they drove. You know, what did they do that was other than just building kind of what their boss told them to build. And the best engineers are exceedingly creative. And that manifests itself in a million different ways. You know, some people think that must just manifest itself in that they have these terrific ideas about let's build this new product that are different. But that's not true. You know, it's pretty well established, and it's been my experience that an excellent software developer can do 10 times the work of a sort of average software developer. And I found that to be absolutely true. And typically the reason for that is the excellent software developer is creative in his approach and looks for ways to solve problems more quickly or apply technology in a different way or look for something that already exists or change the statement of what we need to build so that there's an easier way to do it and so on. So I guess, I mean, you know, there's some aspects of that stereotype that are true, but I'd say by and large, no.
So that creativity that you're describing there, do you feel that can be taught?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And so I don't know if it could be taught, but it can certainly be nurtured. And there are, you know, when we look for software developers, I've found that there are innate skills that you need to have to be a good software developer. So for example, you need to be very good at abstraction, and you need to be very good at the idea of indirection. And for some reason, some people are really good at that, and some people aren't. And you know, that's kind of tough, but that's sort of the way it is. But beyond that, beyond kind of innate ability, you can certainly nurture those traits. You can certainly nurture creativity. I mean, you could do things like have people do case studies. You can evaluate the work that students do in a way that's more creative than just, did you get the right answer to this problem? You can give people interesting assignments that nurture creativity. Here's one that I think is cool that I did as a graduate student. So going way back, I used to TA a course in advanced dynamics. So dynamics are like how things move, right? And one of the problems we gave students was how hard you have to throw a basketball at the floor in order to bounce it through the hoop. And it's amazing. So you give students, these complicated problems about, sending rockets to the moon and stuff like that, and they can mostly figure that out. But that was the whole problem statement. And they'd come and say, well, it depends on the characteristics of the basketball, and there's lots of different ways to do it. And we're like, yeah, that's the point. Go and figure it out. And some students would go to the gym and do experiments where they're throwing basketballs. Some of them would go to the NBA rule book and look up the properties a basketball's supposed to have and figure it out and all kinds of stuff. So you can, I think, do interesting things even at the level of teaching students that foster that kind of creativity. Do your profs give you cool problems like that, or is it all, what's 7 + 5? I hope they do.
You're going to be answering the questions tonight, not us. But I will say that at the Center for Entrepreneurship, we definitely think it's a good idea to be about doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking about doing things, you sort of did something at Amazon now known as cloud computing. And I think it'd be very interesting to hear from your own personal perspective a little bit about how, back when it started in the day, how you anticipated it would be used and how it's actually now being used, and did those match, and what maybe has been surprising to you about some of the ways it's been used?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm one of, so I started by running the engineering team for the thing that turned into cloud computing at Amazon, so there were other people, involved in that as well. But I'd say that, by and large, it has turned out the way we thought it would. I mean, kind of at Amazon, cloud computing came from the fact that we were building this large application to do retail, which hopefully all of you have experience with. If not, I encourage you to use that application as much as you can, because it turns out that buying things on Amazon makes you happy. So do it a lot. And this building this big application, what we found is that our engineering teams, were actually spending most of their time working on stuff that had nothing to do with e-commerce. We called it, Jeff Bezos referred to it as the muck of building applications. And so the idea of cloud computing was how do we make it so that people don't have to live in that muck? And that's not a new idea. If you go back to, say, the 50s and 60s, when people bought computers, they came without operating systems. And so, people who wrote data processing applications back then spent their time building an operating system, and eventually the computer manufacturers figured out, hey, we should build that, and then people don't have to. And the vision of cloud computing was very similar. And very early on, we realized, having understood the von Neumann model of how computers work, that people were going to need computation, they're going to need storage, they're going to need a few other basic things. And although obviously we didn't know exactly what we were going to do, those are the things we built and iterated on. And yeah, it has pretty much worked out.
Surprising uses? I guess, I don't know if applications...
The scale has been surprising. The scale is astonishing. So one of the things I did was work on a product called S3, the simple storage service that people use to store stuff. And we did initial scale estimates for how many objects were going to end up in S3. And I think part of the problem is we came from a retail background where everything's driven by humans. And humans can only sort of do so much. You can only click a web page so many times. When kind of you work on scale issues, they only get so big. And we were just way off. At S3, we thought, maybe would hold, a few 100 billion objects, and kind of we designed it to that point. And it's now, we publicly release numbers every now and then about how big it is. I don't remember the latest one, but it's in the trillions of objects that we store. And when you I can't talk about what our data centers look like because our corporate, PR people will beat me up. But it is really interesting to just look down these rows and rows of servers that are running this stuff. So the scale has been astonishing. The number of companies that have moved over to our platform has been very encouraging. Virtually every startup today uses Amazon Web Services, which is great. But also, more and more big companies are coming onto our platform, which is awesome. that answer your question? That's kind of a...
I think so. I think so. And I guess it makes me think a little bit the way you talk about that it's been suggested that AWS, Amazon Web Services, may not have started or be intended as a social entrepreneurship kind of or social enterprise, but that perhaps because it has sort of translated the capital purchase into an operating cost, that it has actually enabled a lot of social enterprise activity. Is that something that was ever thought about, and how might you guys think about it?
We thought about that a lot.
Really?
So, and this is true for Amazon internally as well, but we, one of the driving motivations for S3 was that at Amazon, or for AWS, was that at Amazon we have this crazy cyclic business. Like people just go nuts and buy tons of stuff at Christmas time, and then the rest of the year things kind of settle out, right? So we have this big hump through the year, and then we also have these big cycles every day because people sleep at night and buy stuff during the day, and then there's kind of two humps when they get home from work and so on. And part of the idea was, well, we have all these servers, and these servers are really busy humming along when there's a lot of stuff going on, but we call it provisioning to peak. We have to provision to peak, which means buy enough servers to handle our peak load, and it cost us a lot of money, and most of those servers weren't doing anything for much of the time. So this is back before web services, and one of the goals of web services was, let's fill in those troughs. Like, let's figure out a way so that we can take our computing power and sell it to other companies who can use it and kind of fill in those troughs. And that quickly leads to the related idea of changing fixed cost to variable costs. So instead of making big capital purchases, let's make variable costs. Let's change that to variable costs and let people buy their computing by the hour. And then it really, this is all before we really even started web services. It doesn't take long to get from there to, who would buy this stuff? Startup companies, because startup companies have this problem that, the odds are you're going to build your thing as a startup company, and you're going to go, okay, what do we do if we're really successful? Well, we have to buy a gajillion servers, but that's going to cost us like $200,000. So I guess what we're going to have to do is raise $200,000 and go and buy all our servers. And they go and do this, and the 200,000 servers sit completely idle because nobody actually uses their service for like a year. But they, they're good entrepreneurs, so they soldier on and they keep making progress, and then it hits 2 years later, and suddenly they have $100,000 worth of computing equipment that's now 2 years old and can't quite keep up, and they're kind of, behind the 8 ball a little bit. And so we realized very early on that we can really help with this problem. We can have people not have to spend the $200,000 and instead just provision based on their load day by day, or even more recently, hour by hour. So as a startup, if you hit it big, and hopefully hitting it big means revenue coming in, then you can scale up and buy the computing you need. If you don't hit it big, then you're not out a ton of money and have investors after you. So yeah, that was very early on we realized that was the case, and that's really worked out for us, and I think for the startup community as well. I think it's changed the game.
Sounds like a win-win.
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
It works out well for all the little companies that turn into nothing, and then the ones that turn into Dropbox, it works for them too.
How does it work for the companies that turn into nothing?
Well, at least they turn into nothing, and they don't owe $200,000 for a bunch of servers that they didn't end up using.
That sounds good. There's a lot packed into that answer, and of all the good questions that have been suggested, this certainly is not one of them, but I'm wondering, is there a particular, because this is just my question, is there a particular hour of the day when you talk about these purchases that I need to stay away from my computer? What is the hour that people do the most purchasing?
All the time. I tell you, the more you buy, and with your phone, you can be, buying whenever you feel like. With Prime,
do you want me to get something?
Moment, boom.
Anything particular right now? Should I just go ahead
Sure.
and do something? Are universities and academic institutions people who use the scale and the
well, so to be honest, we do have educational programs. I'm not super familiar with kind of what we supply for sort of undergraduate programs and so on. I do follow the research community really closely, and if you go to one of the big conferences on very large databases, or SOSP on operating systems, and so on, a very high percentage of the research groups use Amazon Web Services to run experiments based on the systems that they're building, right? I mean, if you're a database researcher, you want to say, here's how my database is going to perform, when you load it with this gigantuous load, but all you're really doing is running experiments. And in the old days, what you'd have to do is write NSF grant applications or go to companies and beg for money so that you could buy a super humongous computer that you would use for 2 days a year when you ran your experiment. And now that's no longer required. As a concrete example of that, a group out of Yale is doing database research, and recently they published a paper in 2012 where there's a famous database benchmark called TPCC. Anyway, this is the benchmark that people use to gauge how fast databases are. And it's always won by companies that run on extremely expensive hardware, like hardware that costs tens of millions of dollars. And they built this system, and they ran it on a bunch of AWS equipment, and they ran it for like a couple of days. And I don't know how much they spent, but it was, you know, sort of a few $1,000s to get their system, to demonstrate that their system could run with the same performance as these systems that run on very expensive computer equipment. So it's certainly used on the research side of academia, and I know that there are programs for the undergraduate side, but I don't really know much about them.
Okay, well, maybe we'll get access to a little bit of those while we're here. So there are some great questions. One of them comes from Peter Drake, who's our associate professor in the computer science department. And he was wondering what you foresee as some of the biggest trends in information technology that are coming in the next few years.
Yeah, big trends in information technology. So that's a tough question, tough in that I actually have an hour-long presentation that I give every now and then on trends in distributed computing and where you know, changes that are happening in that technology. So it's kind of hard to condense that into 60 seconds. But I'll give it a shot.
Well, how about 3 minutes?
So I'll give it a shot. I'll say some of the things that people find interesting. So one of the things that's interesting, people here know what Moore's Law is? Does everybody here know what Moore's Law is? Yes, all right. So what Moore's Law basically says is that computers are getting faster. And you know, as a result of that, what you might think is that, well, so as computer scientists, our jobs will be more and more simple because computers are getting faster. And I use this analogy of vacuum cleaners. When I do the talk, I have a picture of one of the first vacuums that came out in like 1908. And people thought that when vacuum cleaners came out, nobody would have to do housework anymore because this thing could do your housework in like a tiny amount of time. And what happened? Anybody know what happened? What happened is that people spent exactly the same amount of time doing housework because people's standards of cleanliness went up. And so in terms of trends, what's happened in computing is that computers have gotten faster and faster, but what's happened is people's expectations have gone up even faster than Moore's Law. And so as a result, our jobs have become more and more difficult as computer scientists, trying to keep up with people's crazy expectations. So that's kind of an interesting trend. I think that people's expectations for what their mobile devices will do are going up at a crazy rate, much faster than, say, Moore's Law. Another thing I talk about, this is kind of geeky, so we'll talk about it really quickly, is that there's a lot more computers than there used to be, especially with mobile and cloud computing and so on. When I was at the University of Waterloo, we had this room called the Red Room in the Math and Computer building that you could walk around, and the cool thing was you could look down into the Red Room and see the computer. And now, of course, there's a lot of computers, and so in terms of kind of theory and research, I don't know if anybody here is getting their PhD in computer science, but the kind of stuff that used to be considered esoteric distributed systems research is now mainstream. And the biggest issue is that you can, you know, when you're running things on one computer, things are fairly straightforward. There's a saying that's out there that a man with a watch knows what time it is. A man with 2 watches is never sure. And computing has this problem that when you have distributed computing, there's a lot of these kind of problems that need to be solved, especially in the presence of failures and so on. Another one that's also fairly geeky, I guess, is to talk about the future of data structure and database technology, which is interesting. So, you know, I kind of draw this timeline out. If you go back to the 50s through about the mid-60s, when people did computing, they used things like tapes and punch cards. And the thing that's interesting about those media is you scan through them, right? They're linear. Like you can't randomly access to places. And in the early 70s, there were 2 big inventions, or 2 things that went mainstream that completely changed how people did computing. And one of those things, of course, is a hard disk, which, although, you know, had started development in the 50s, really in the 70s is when it became mainstream. And the other one is a super geeky invention. I wonder if anybody knows what this is the B tree. How many people here know what a B tree is? Like 4. Okay, that's usually when I give this audience to this talk, it's like a geeky convention, and everybody's like, of course we know what B trees are. Who do you think we are? Anyway, the combination of the hard drive and the B tree, and I'm getting to a point, led to the development of the database technology that we still use today. Basically, when we write computer software that does database-ish stuff, it's the same as it was in 1974 with a few changes. And so the technology thing that's happening now is NAND flash, which is completely changing the game again. Some of you might be buying laptops where you're offered SSDs, solid-state drives, and those things are completely different than hard drives. Like, hard drives have this problem that they spin, right? So to find a particular piece of data you're looking for, you got to spin this thing and wait till the arm gets to the data you're looking for. And in 1974, the average, they called it seek time, the time to seek to a particular piece of data. In 1974, the seek time for finding data was around 20 milliseconds. Okay? And everything else in computing, has gone crazy. Today, the very fastest computers have seek times around 7 milliseconds. So it's really not gotten much better. But NAND flash, so you have, I'm looking for plateaus, right? Those are interesting. So there's this plateau of seek time, which has really driven everything about database research to this day. And the thing that with NAND flash, suddenly it's becoming practical and cost-effective to have, to have storage in the terabytes that does not have seek times anymore, right? Because NAND flash is this solid state stuff. It's the, it's the stuff in your iPod or, whatever. And so that has the promise of just revolutionizing how we do database technologies, which for you all has the promise of changing the latencies that you come to expect on your internet applications and making them faster and faster. So anyway, that's a sort of long, geeky answer about, but this is what I think. When I think of trends in computing, I think of like stuff like this. That's interesting to me.
As a non-science, non-computer person, I would sort of say it sounds like bigger and faster.
Well, but it's different, right? It is bigger and faster, but when people think bigger and faster in computers, they think of this. Mm-hmm. And the thing with storage technologies, it's actually this. It was this speed for 10 years, and then it was this speed, and now it's going way up again, right? And it's those breaks that lead to revolutions in how people do computing. And so you think about the difference in computing before hard drives, like in the 60s and the 50s and 60s, and after, right? Before it was all batch systems, because you have your tape, you want to run a payroll thing, it takes time. And then after 1974 or 5, people expected online systems where you could actually access your data in real time. And every single person here expects online systems, right? They expect to be able to access their data in real time. And the interesting thing is kind of when you get the next break, the next inflection point, what kind of new applications does that open up? And it's not just the existing ones going faster. It's like the difference from batch to online. And the fascinating one in this space is this is brand new. This has been like 2 years. So if there's PhD people who are like IT kind of databasey people, there's tons of research going on in this, of course. But what we're actually looking for is the next B tree. We're looking for the next way to do computing on NAND flash devices, and we haven't cracked that. In the computer community, we have not cracked that. And when we do, it's going to lead to new and innovative things. So it's not just bigger and faster. It's like bigger and faster, but like it's the difference between driving my Tesla and flying my airplane.
That sounds like a big difference. We'll have to get you to come back and tell us when you get to that. I want to ask
you guys have a computer science school here?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, some people are in it, right on?
Right. You spoke a little earlier about the importance of not just what you study, but who you study it with. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit with us about mentors and whether you had mentors in your education and after that, and a little bit maybe about how you found them and how they affected your journey.
I think that's tremendously important. And honestly, as an undergraduate, I did a terrible job seeking out mentors and looking for advice, even though the opportunities were open to me. And that's one thing I would do differently. By the time I got to graduate school, of course, in graduate school, you're forced to have mentors because you're given like a supervisor, and usually you pick a supervisor who will be able to mentor you effectively, and so on. So it's a little easier to come by. In industry, I've had fantastic mentors. I'd say I'll tell one story about one mentor I had was a guy named Rick Dalzell. When I was hired into Amazon, Rick was the CIO of the company, and he was my boss. And Rick was quite different than me. As you've probably figured out, I'm like this super geeky techno nerd, and I think people lead from their strengths, and that's always been my strength, that I can communicate with the engineers on their terms, and I can lead from that position of strength. His strength was completely different. He was a West Point graduate, one of the few people I know who I think could legitimately kill me with his bare hands. His strength was how to, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but we used to talk about Rick's Jedi mind trick. It's like how to get people to do what you want them to do. But not in a bad way, I mean in a really good way. And so from Rick I learned, I'd be in meetings with Rick, and afterwards he'd put his arm around me and he'd say, so, what will you do differently next time, Socrates? and I think I learned how to be a better, I know I learned how to be a much better leader from Rick, and he was just a fantastic mentor for me in developing those skills.
We bring up an interesting point. What's it like to manage large groups of very smart people?
It's great. I don't know, what else can you say?
How did you learn how to do that? You talked about being a student in computer science. How does someone in your position end up learning how to manage groups of people?
Right, so I'd say I developed most of my management skills sort of through trial by fire at the startup company I was with, RogueWave Software. We grew that from, I ran engineering, and it started like with me, and then grew to, I know the engineering is about 150 people, the company's about 600 people, about $50 million a year in revenues, in the space of about like 4 years. So I don't know how to answer that question because I just was kind of forced to learn it, quickly. I think I made a ton of mistakes. I would love to do that again. So I guess I learned by making mistakes and hopefully learning from them. I do, again, I wish as an undergrad or even a graduate student, I would have at least taken a few courses in some of the basics of how to manage folks. And to me, the hard part is the part about, so there's a saying that I use sometimes at software engineers, they're border collies, right? So the thing with border collies is they are gonna run around and do stuff. Like, that's what they do. The whole trick, if you're a farmer running sheep, is to make them all do kind of the same thing so they end up hurting the sheep instead of just running around, right? If you're a physics person, you can think about generating light instead of heat. Like, you want people moving forward, and that's what managing software engineers is like, and I wish I understood a little bit more of how to do that. So I'll say that, when I went to school, when I was doing this, the sort of nuts and bolts side of it, like, don't break any of these HR laws, and there's a correct way to manage people out of the company, and so on. Those things were fairly easy for me because as a techno guy, that's just following rules. The hard part was figuring out how to herd these cats so that they actually did something productive and useful, and I wish I'd had more experience learning how to do that when I was a student. But can't have everything.
Want to make sure we save some time for questions that come from the audience, but I got a couple more I'm hoping we can sort of get to here. And you brought up RogueWave a moment ago, a company you started, and one of the things that our Center for Entrepreneurship is focusing on and spending a lot of time trying to share with students here is the concepts around and the importance of traction, of actually getting something started, moving from an idea. Do you even, is it still in memory? Can you pull up, what did you do at RogueWave to get your very first initial traction? How did you guys get started?
Yeah, I can bring that up again and again. I mean, I think, so I'm gonna say sort of two things around that. One is at Amazon and at RogueWave too, although we kind of weren't as deliberate about it at RogueWave, at Amazon we're very deliberate about focusing on customers. And that doesn't mean literally going to your customers and saying, what should we do now? I mean, no customer is going to tell us, what you guys need is the Prime service, right? So we talk about inventing on behalf of our customers, because customers aren't going to tell you what to invent. If they did, then everybody would start companies. It'd be easy. And at RogueWave, we had to learn a similar lesson. So the way we originally got traction is, it was actually not me who started it, it was my friend Tom Keffer who started it, and then I came and joined him, and we'd collaborated on, he was an oceanographer, and I was doing my PhD and stuff, And we collaborated on some mathematical tools. And we thought, you know what we should do? You know, who doesn't need math tools? We should sell these mathematical tools to the world, and it'll be awesome. So it was a C++ thing. We start doing that. And what would happen is we'd find the odd customer who would buy our stuff, not very many of them, but we'd find the odd one. And they'd say, you know, what I really need is a general purpose data structures library. And we'd say, oh, how about that? And then we'd find the next customer, and they'd say, what I really need is general purpose data structures. And we're like, well, that's easy, right? We're doing these super sophisticated math things, you know, we're not gonna stoop to building, you know, to doing that. And of course we had our own general purpose data structures library that we had to use for our own stuff. And eventually we started selling, you know, eventually we figured it out. And we started selling that. So I guess the way we got traction was, not surprisingly, by listening to our customers. And this is a true story, and it boggles my mind to this day how, you know, it takes an element of luck. We were lucky enough that at the time this new computer language, C++, came out, and there was no general purpose data structures library for it. Like, nobody would make that mistake today. But AT&T made that mistake when they produced this language. And as a result, once we produced this thing and got it out there and got some reputation for it being good, it sold like crazy. Like, for a year, this is pre-internet, literally our problem was we weren't able to hire, you know, semi-qualified people fast enough to answer the phones and take orders. It was awesome.
That sounds like a champagne problem.
Yeah, it's a very high-class problem, but that was our problem.
One of the other things we try and ask folks who come and visit with us is to perhaps share, we call it a failure sharing. It seems entrepreneurs, unlike maybe military generals, are actually interested in talking about their failures. Is there one that you might be willing to share with us tonight, an entrepreneurial?
Oh, I've failed over and over and over again. Honestly, that's how you learn, right? So I'll tell a larger one that's very easy to understand, I think, and really illuminates the idea. At Amazon, we believe strongly in this too, that when we have an idea of something that we know is the right thing to do for our customers, we will keep iterating on it for a long time until we get it right. In fact, it's one of the things I learned going from RogueWave to Amazon is patience and the value of thinking about the long term. So one example is we knew from the start, well, by the time I got to Amazon at least, that the business was not going to scale. We weren't going to be able to offer the selection we wanted to our customers if we had to source all the inventory ourselves. We knew we had to find a way to get third parties to provide inventory into our, you know, e-commerce application. And at first what we did is we built a site that was essentially a clone of eBay. Because we thought, eBay does this, right? And at the time, I don't know if people here remember, like 99, 2000, people thought eBay were going to eat our lunch. Because at Amazon, we had to, you know, here's our Amazon business. We buy a toaster for 30 bucks, we sell it to you for 35, we make 5. That's our business. eBay's business is they find somebody with a toaster and somebody who wants the toaster, and they don't do anything, and they make like 3 bucks. So on one side of it, that seems like a better business, right? Because you don't have to buy toasters and have warehouses and do all this stuff. So we wanted part of that. So we built this site, this auction site, and nobody used it because there was no underlying network, right? There weren't enough users for it. Anybody here ever used Amazon auctions back in 2000? Nobody used it. And so that didn't work out. Then we tried the next thing, which was a thing we called Z-shops. Which is where people could have like their own storefront on Amazon. And, you know, and we experimented with that, and that failed too. But the thing is, you know, what do you do when you fail? You keep trying, right, if you know your idea is right. And then I remember being in the meeting where somebody had the idea that, you know what we should do? We should actually let third parties put their stuff on the same detail pages as Amazon stuff. And people said, that is crazy, right? If you do that, then people are going to buy from these third parties, so they'll buy their toaster from some other company, and we'll only make 3 bucks instead of 5 bucks. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But that is, of course, what we did. And anybody who shops on Amazon to this day knows that that is how we finally cracked the code on this idea of getting third parties to provide inventory into the system. And it took us 3 tries. And I have more geeky stories in web services where we have products that failed and we try again, they'd fail, we try again, they fail, we try again, because we knew they were the right thing to do, but it's not as easy to get as the story of auctions and Z-shops and finally single detail page.
Turning that Rubik's Cube. Mm-hmm. I wanted to just for a moment touch on the fact Lewis and Clark, has a long-standing international study abroad program, and we have many students that come from overseas to study here. We even have American citizens who grew up overseas and study, and we put a lot of focus on a global perspective here. And so I was wondering if you had thoughts or might talk a bit about how a global perspective is or isn't important at a place like Amazon.
Yeah, I could talk a bit about that. I mean, the answer, of course, is it's super important, and I can speak more to the web services business because that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years or so. In the retail business, it's very important. I just don't know very much about what's going on there in terms of globalization right now. But I mean, even just in terms of simple requirements, in Europe, there's requirements that people have for certain types of data that the data never actually leave the boundaries of Europe. So you have to be able to understand those requirements and so on. I say though more directly for the bringing in international students and studying abroad, I think that it's at least as important for diversifying yourself personally as it is for what you can contribute to the company that you may end up working for. And this is part of what we talked about earlier with creativity. To me, that's how you foster creativity, is you put yourself in new places and new situations, and then you have to figure out how to deal with them. And that's awesome. I mean, from a very simple point of view, we do have development offices all over the world at Amazon, and we hire people from all over the world because, we do live in a big world, and there's talent all over the place, so we can't hire talent fast enough in the U.S. But I think that's almost more important for personal development than from the company's point of view.
Great. Well, I think maybe I'll ask one more question, but Brian, if you can see if there are questions you want to grab. I think I'll just end these questions by saying, is there a piece of popular entrepreneurial advice that you disagree with? And along with that, if you could offer a first-time entrepreneur only one piece of advice, what might that be?
Well, that's really tough, actually. And so I'm going to say this about advice. My experience that I've kind of learned over a long time has been to try to gather advice from as many people as possible. And the thing of it is that, most advice is kind of sound in its own particular context. So what you have to do is take pieces of advice and then apply them to who you are and decide whether they fit you or not. Like, for example, when I was coming out of graduate school, and just to set context a little bit, my wife was 8 months pregnant with our second child, and we had a little baby, so we weren't kind of, let's just go off and give something a try because we have no responsibilities, and we were going to buy a house and so on. And I was given strong advice from an uncle of mine who's a CEO for a company, who should know, saying, don't join this startup. That's like the dumbest thing you can do because startups fail 90% of the time.
Which is correct.
Which is correct. At the time, I had an offer from GE, which would have paid me well over twice what the startup was offering me, what RogueWave was offering. And then there were other factors as well. RogueWave was on the other side of the world from where all our friends and family are, and here we are with 2 little kids, and we don't know anybody, and so on. And GE was just over the lake. It was in the States, but you gotta lower yourself at some point. For me, that advice of take this safer job would have been the worst possible thing. It would have just. I love building stuff, and I love being in an environment where I never know quite what's going to happen, where I've got freedom to try different things, and I don't think that would have worked kind of working on the same thing I'd been doing with my research, my PhD research at a big company. So I guess that's sort of I don't know if any advice is particularly terrible, but it doesn't always apply to who you are. Like every single thing I've said, you could say, that's crazy, Why should I take courses from this professor just because he's awesome when I know exactly what I want to do with my life, so I want to take all these courses that line up with that, and that might be the right thing for you.
I think you just managed, much like a systems design engineer, to answer 2 questions with one answer: the advice you don't think people should take and the advice that you think they should. Nicely done.
Yeah.
Brian, do you have?
Hello. So I'm Brian Detweiler-Bedell. I'm the academic director of the Center for Entrepreneurship. If you have any questions that you filled out on cards, why don't you pass those over to me? And while you do so, we'll start out with a fun one that was submitted. What's your position on accepting cryptocurrency, I assume like Bitcoins, as payment on Amazon?
What's our position on, did you say on
Accepting
testing or on using it?
cryptocurrency
On what?
as payment.
Oh, as
on
payment. So I am a big believer that at some point in time, the credit card system will kind of, will be supplanted online by something better. And again, it's one of these step function disruptive things, right? Like we went from a cash and check-based society that was plagued by problems like bad debt, right? When as a retailer, you get checks and they wouldn't clear and you'd have to deal with that and everything. And because of that like forced the credit card thing into being. And we've been in that mode for a while. And I am convinced at some point we're gonna have something else disruptive. Personally, I don't think Bitcoin is it. And I think for a company like Amazon, we take lots of different kinds of payment. People pay us with ECH, they pay us with their credit cards. Whatever, we don't currently accept Bitcoin as payment, and honestly, I have no idea what our payments people, kind of think about that. But personally, in terms of will that technology disruption happen? Yeah, at some point it will. Does anybody here use Bitcoin for anything? No, see, that's the problem. Right? These things aren't, but these things don't, there's a network problem, right? That they're not valuable until other people are using them. So someone has to crack the coin on getting the network, crack the code on getting the network started.
I think the closest we come is using it for a lecture at the moment.
So one related to disruption, which we were talking about in class the other day, actually. You mentioned game changers and breakthroughs in technology. What's necessary to create a disruptive innovation? Personal genius, corporate culture, some perfect storm of need, know-how?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because if you look at what futurists have to say, there are these people who do nothing but kind of pontificate on in the future, we'll all be doing this and this and this. And most of what they say does turn out to be correct. The really hard part is predicting when those things will happen. And there obviously has to be a whole confluence of factors that come together and make that happen. So I don't have a really good answer for that. I have a very Amazon answer, which is that if we believe that there's going to be a disruption in some area, we will keep hitting it over and over and over again until we eventually succeed. But I don't have a good pithy answer for that, I'm afraid.
And what's your personal definition of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking?
So, for myself, am I an entrepreneur? I don't know, I've never been a CEO. I don't do that. I've invested in a bunch of companies. Does that make me an entrepreneur? I don't really think so. But to me, an entrepreneur is someone who takes an idea and then figures out how to do whatever needs to be done to take that idea and turn it into a real thing that customers are using, right? That to me is what an entrepreneur is, and that I've done over and over again. And part of it's because I'm just bullheaded. Part of it's because I like to do whatever's necessary to make things happen. So here does this make me an entrepreneur? I don't know. In the early days of Rogue Wave, we were a startup company. We were obviously trying our best not to spend money and so on. So we would do everything. That is when pre-internet, when the truck would come with manuals and the disk drives, I'd get down out of my office and I'd unload the truck and take the manuals and put them down in the basement because the truck was blocking traffic and we didn't want the local businesses mad at us. We set up our own booth equipment at trade shows. Again, pre-internet, there were these things called trade shows that we went to. And so here's a skill that I learned. At the Javits Center in New York City, I learned that the Teamsters have a deal where they set up your booth. And it costs you $250 or something outrageous to have your booth set up by the Teamsters. And you're not allowed to bring in your own extension cords or anything. They have to supply it might have been more than $250. They have to supply all this stuff. But I learned that if you find the right guy, and the guy's name was literally Guido, and paid Guido $100 or something, he'd let you set up your own booth and you could save that money. So that's kind of what I mean about, you have an idea, you want to turn it into something that makes customers happy, you do whatever the steps are in between that are necessary to make that happen. So I guess that's my definition.
So two more questions I think we have time for. One short one, it follows up on being an entrepreneur. How many hours do you work a week? And you work less now than when you were establishing your own company and getting started at Amazon?
You know, that's different people have different styles for how many hours they work. My style is that when I'm into something, I'm all in. So when my kids were small, of course, I worked less hours per week, I'm sure, but I'm actually very excited about this weekend because my wife is off at the coast, and I'll miss her, of course. She's off at the coast with her friends. But I have 2 solid days to get a bunch of stuff done that I've wanted to get done for ages. And so I'm going to work all weekend and get this stuff done because I care about that. On the other hand, you know, I'll take 4 months off and go on a walkabout somewhere. So that's just who I am. I like to be all in for whatever I'm doing. But again, I think it's one of those things that depends on who you are. Some people are successful by focusing really hard for 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day, and they're able to get enough done during that time. That's not me. I work more than that.
So work hard, play hard?
Well, again, it's a personal thing, but that's what I do. I work hard and try to play hard, yeah.
That's good, because we get to have a reception just after that, so. Okay, so the last question, and I think it's a particularly apt one for where we're at. Being at a primarily tech-based company, where do you see the value of a liberal arts education or humanities education? Do you think the shift in the world becoming increasingly digital is changing the value or need for such an education?
So I do not believe that the changes in kind of the digital economy are decreasing the need for such an education. And the answer is that, yeah, I'm a tech guy and I've always managed teams of engineers and so on because that's what I do, but I've always worked closely with people who are not engineers. And they do, you know, all manner of stuff for us. I have found, people with the humanities educations that I have a lot of respect for often will do things like get an MBA afterwards and get a little bit of sort of practical training in sort of practical things, and I find it helps to be analytical and able to do that. But I'm kind of rambling and not answering your question directly, but the answer is that, of course, I feel liberal arts education is a good thing to have, develops you as a person, teaches you how to think, which is the primary thing that you're supposed to learn when you're at school, teaches you how to think critically. Hopefully it teaches you how to do objective analysis, which is, a super useful skill. So yeah, again, people lead from their strengths, right? I think I said that before. My strength is being super technical. I know lots of people who lead from strengths other than that, many of whom have liberal arts educations.
Terrific, thank you. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight. This is one of the first efforts of the Center for Entrepreneurship. We had a venture competition last year. We have some classes. The Fireside Chats were just kicking off tonight, and we plan to have 5 more of them over the course of the calendar year, so 2 more this semester. And we're just thrilled, Allan, that you were able to be here, and we thank you for that. So let's give Allan a round of applause for being here. And like I promised, just around the way outside to the left, we're having a reception. So if you had one of the questions I wasn't able to get to, please come out and chat with Allan out there and chat with all of us and network a little bit. Thank you all.